All right, everybody, open up to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 24. Matthew 24, verse 3. Now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" Yeshua, Jesus, answered and said to them, "Beware that nobody deceives you. Many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Messiah,' and will deceive many. And you'll hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end isn't yet. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Then they'll deliver you up to tribulation and kill you. And you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended and betray each other, will hate each other. Then many false prophets will arise to deceive many. And because lawlessness will increase, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is in the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of the prophet Daniel, what is that? When did Daniel speak of it? Daniel 11, verse 31 says this, "And forces shall stand on his part, and they shall profane the sanctuary, even the fortress, and shall take away the continual burnt offering, and they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate." Daniel 11, 31. In Hebrew, the word is, or the phrase is, hasikutz m'shomem, the abomination. The first word usually refers to an idol. Daniel 12, verse 11 says this, the last chapter of Daniel, "From the time that the continual burnt offering shall be taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days." After Daniel wrote that, and after the completion of the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Scriptures, before the New Testament happened, something happened in Jerusalem. The temple of Jerusalem was desecrated by Antiochus Epiphanes, the Syrian Greek king. He entered the temple, he slaughtered a pig, defiled it with pig's blood, and set up an idol on the altar of God. The act is recorded in the historical record of 1 Maccabees 1:54. That's not the Bible, but it's historical, which says this, "Now the 15th day of the month of Kislev, in the 145th year, they set up the abomination of desolation on the altar, and build idol altars throughout the cities of Judah on every side." It happened, and yet Messiah is speaking about a future event concerning the second coming, which lets you know that the events of Hanukkah, they make up a foreshadow of end-time prophecy. In Hanukkah, a man attempts to join the world together into one civilization. So too in the last days. The man attempts to force all people to abandon their ways, their tradition, their worship, the God they know, and to worship the God he ordains or that the state tells them to worship. So in the last days, book of Revelation. In Daniel, a man proclaims himself, calls himself God. That's Antiochus Epiphanes. His name means God manifest. In the last days, listen to what Paul writes in 2 Thessalonians, verse 3, chapter 2. "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come," speaking about the second coming, "until there first comes a falling away, an apostasy." Well, do we see that happening? "And that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above everything that's called God or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sits in the temple of God to show himself that he is God." Revelation 13:5. "There was given to him a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given to him to continue for 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and those who dwell in heaven. Revelation 13, verse 8, and all those who dwell on the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb. Verse 11, I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth. Verse 12, and he causes the earth and those who dwell within it to worship the first beast. 14, they shall make an image to the beast. 15, he had power to give life to the image of the beast. Same elements of Hanukkah. A man proclaims himself to be God, comes into the temple of God, defiles the temple. An image is set up as in an idol, causing the world or trying to force the world to worship this one. The abomination, desolation, that desolates and makes the temple desolate, void, an idol. And yet it happened in a form in the book of Maccabees. It happened in between the Old and New Testament. So we see an allusion again in it in the 70 weeks of Daniel, which talks of Messiah's coming, gives a countdown mathematically. And when you get to the 70th week is missing from the first calculations, a 7-year period at the end, which we call the tribulation period. It says in Daniel 9, verse 27, and he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week. And according to them, that's a week of years. That's 7 years. And in the midst of the week, or in the middle of the week, he will cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and upon the wing of abominations shall come one that makes desolate, even to the end, and that determined wrath will be poured out on the desolate. So again, abomination, desolation, when, according to Daniel, in the middle of the 7-year period, that's the 3.5 year end period, in the middle of the week. Match that up with Revelation 13. There was given to him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power with him to continue for 42 months. What is 42 months? 3.5 years. Same thing. And it's the same chapter that speaks of the image of the beast. There is a principle that occurs at times in biblical prophecy, that there's often a near fulfillment, a foreshadow, and then an ultimate fulfillment of a prophecy, one prophecy. So what Daniel spoke came true in one sense. He was speaking on one hand about what happened with Antiochus and the Maccabees, but he's also speaking about the end times and the Antichrist. So what it tells us is that Hanukkah, what happened in Hanukkah, should give us a revelation of what is yet to come. And the fact is, I've shared this, that Hanukkah is the most detailed end-time prophetic revelation given in a Hebrew holy day. Does the account of what happened in Maccabees give us any more revelation of this? It does. 2 Maccabees verse 6 identifies the desolation, it was an idol to a Greek god, and the Greek god was the god Zeus. Zeus, the king of the Greek pantheon of gods, an image of Zeus defiled the temple. The temple of God in Jerusalem became the temple of Zeus, a pagan temple. And the record goes on to say how pagans filled the temple with drunkenness and immorality and prostitutes. It became the temple of Zeus. And with this came a war on God across the land. It says they set up idols all over the land. They persecuted God's people in the name of Zeus across the land. It was a war of Zeus and the Greek gods against God. They said if you observe the law of God, the Torah, you would be killed. If you observe the Sabbath, you would be killed. They burned the scrolls of God. A war of Zeus against God. What do we know about Zeus? Zeus was the chief of all god of the Greek gods, and his myth goes like this. Cronus, the king of the Titans, we know him as Father Time, Cronus, chronology, carrying the sickle, the man with the sickle every new year. Nice old Father Time. Actually, he wasn't nice at all. He used the sickle to mutilate his father, Uranus. He then reigned with the Titans, receiving a prophecy that one of his children would replace him, would supplant him. So in response, naturally, he begins to eat his children as they're born. The guy was not a Christian. He ate his 3 daughters and then his 2 sons, Poseidon, from which we get Neptune, Hades, from which we get the dwarf planet Pluto, and Rhea, his wife, when it came time for her sixth child, she went to an island in a cave. She gave birth and took a large stone, wrapped it in swaddling cloths, and gave it to Cronus, who, of course, ate it. Meanwhile, the boy was raised. The baby was called Zeus. He grew up sheltered from his father. As soon as Zeus reaches manhood, he begins his revenge. He causes his father to get nauseous and vomit out the children. Zeus then casts out his father Cronus from the sky to the depths of the universe in chains and wars against the Titans. Zeus divides up the world with his brothers. Poseidon, Neptune rules the water. Hades or Pluto, the underworld, that's where we get the Greek word, or linked to the Greek word, one way or the other, that both are to Hades, which meant the place of the dead, which was also used in the New Testament. Zeus reigned from Mount Olympus, a mountain chain in Greece, often covered with clouds. The Greeks saw it as linked to the heavens. The word survives today in the word Olympics. There the gods drank and feasted. Zeus, as with other gods, was subject to very low passions. Love, well, that's not low, but lust, hate, envy, treachery, sin. Zeus was married to the goddess Hera, but he was not a model husband. Their marriage had a lot of problems, mainly because he kept cheating, not only with goddesses, but with women on earth. There's a book that they give to help marriages called Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. It would not have helped this marriage, because though the god Mars was born from Zeus and Hera, Venus was born from one of Zeus's cheating on Hera. Statues of Zeus represented a bearded man, dignified middle-aged man. When Paul and Barnabas preached at Lystra, the crowd believed that Barnabas was Zeus, which probably meant Barnabas was older, maybe taller, and probably looked more dignified. And Paul was the one speaking, so they thought he was the messenger god. Zeus was the sky god, the lord of thunder and wind, clouds and rain, a god of the mountaintops. His chief weapon was the thunderbolt, often depicted as a man holding a thunderbolt ready to strike someone. The name Zeus is linked to the word Deus, the name of the Indo-European god of the sky, also called Sky Father. In Sanskrit, Deus Pita, or Deu Pater, which becomes Jupiter. We get Jupiter from the same thing, another version of Zeus. The word God in the Latin-based languages is linked to the same word, Deus, or Dios, or De, or Deus. The English word deity comes from the same word. So what happened in Israel in the time of the Maccabees? A war breaks out of the gods, of the Greek gods against the living God. A war of the god Zeus against God. Zeus was the epitome of everything Greek. Greek culture, Greek religion, the head. So to the people of Israel, Zeus represented everything Greek, which was advocated as the way of enlightenment, the way of knowledge. It was the newest thing. It was the way to go. It was modernism, that which freed you from the old ways. In this case, it was the temptation to abandon the God of your fathers, the worship of God and the ways of God. Zeus represented the sensual. You could see his image, you could touch his statue, unlike the God of the Bible, who was unseen. Zeus warred on the spiritual. He tempted with the material, the tangible, to abandon the spiritual. Zeus was the god also, he was a god of sexual immorality, the god of adultery, fornication. The ways that was advocated in much of Greek culture often involved sexual immorality. Even their worship involved often sexual immorality. As the temple of Jerusalem was now filled with prostitutes, to them that was holy. For the people of Israel, Zeus was the new morality, to temptation, to abandon holiness for sexual impurity, to tell them that their old ways were rigid and constricting, to abandon this for the sensual, the pleasure. The new morality glorified man. Man was the center, not God. It glorified the human body. Athletes walked around naked, nudity. And the Greek morality included homosexuality. The myth of Zeus not only involves adultery, but at least one myth involves him with homosexuality. For the people of Israel, the principle or the spirit of Zeus was that of the new morality. Sensuality over holiness, sexual immorality over godliness, the material over the spiritual, and it comes in the guise of enlightenment And yet it's the spirit of apostasy, the spirit of desecration, seeking to cause the people of Israel to abandon the God of Israel. And in the name of this God Zeus, not only were they tempted, but they were coerced and compelled and forced and persecuted and killed for not giving up God. It was the war of Zeus. Now there was another war of Zeus against God, and it happened in AD 132. The Roman Emperor Hadrian renamed Jerusalem after Jerusalem had been destroyed, but then it went on the next century, called the city Aelia Capitolina, naming it after the Roman god Zeus, Jupiter or Zeus. Jupiter is a Roman name of Zeus. So he began to build a temple of Zeus or Jupiter on the Temple Mount. Again, the same war to defile the desecration of the temple, or even now the Temple Mount, the replacement of God with Zeus. And the result of this desecration was the Bar Kokhba revolt, one of the great wars and the great catastrophes in Jewish history. Zeus, again, against the God of Israel, and the result was 580,000 people, they estimate, were killed, Jewish people killed. The Emperor Hadrian banned the Hebrew calendar and banned the Torah, like Antiochus. And on the Temple Mount, it was like he's following in the footsteps. On the Temple Mount, he burned the scrolls of God's Word on the Temple Mount, as if he's following Antiochus. And as Antiochus, he erected on the Temple Mount a statue of Jupiter, an idol of Zeus, and a statue of himself. That kind of goes, just like Antiochus, it was about himself as well. And so he did something else as a result. In the war of Zeus, in the name of Zeus, he renamed the land of Israel, and he called it Syria Palestina, the birth of Palestine. In the war, the name Palestine was given to the land under the idol of Zeus, with its capital. So the land was called Palestine, and its capital city was the city of Zeus. Now, if Hanukkah is a foreshadow of the end times, and an abomination, this is a foreshadow of these things, then what does it reveal about the end times? It reveals that in the last days, there will be in some form the principle of Zeus, or what Zeus represented, the spirit of Zeus, which is what? It is this. It's the advocating of a new morality. Which is propagated as the way of enlightenment and the way of knowledge, which tells you to abandon the old ways. In this case, the temptation to abandon God, the worship of God, the ways of God, and the Word of God. You can see it now. In our culture, in our government, in our legal system, in our television set, in our school system, in America and the Western world, it reveals something. Hanukkah's revealing something. In the last days, this spirit will represent the sensual. It will war against the spiritual. It will tempt with material things, with material things replacing the spiritual, an overload of images, an overload of sensations, of data to drown out the spiritual with God. The spirit will be a spirit of sexual immorality, adultery, fornication. It will tempt towards immorality. It will tempt God's people to abandon holiness and join Him. It will say that the ways of God are rigid, constricting, abandon His word. It will glorify man, the human body. Does this sound familiar? It will cause images of nudity to proliferate. It will endorse homosexuality. Sensuality over holiness, the material over the spiritual. In the guise of enlightenment, it is the spirit of apostasy, the spirit of desecration, seeking to cause the people of God in the last days to abandon God's ways and to seduce them, and not only seduce them, but if not that, to coerce them, to force the people of God to abandon the ways of God and worship other gods and endorse abomination. Just as right now there are Christians being judged guilty by the state, I shared on Friday, for not endorsing immorality. And the state and the culture seeks to force them to do so. Same thing. The spirit of Zeus sought to force Jewish people to worship and to offer sacrifices to idols. It is ultimately the spirit, in the end, after seduction comes persecution. If it cannot seduce, it will keep It will seek to silence, to stamp out, to declare illegal, and to destroy. This is what Hanukkah reveals about the end times, the spirit of Zeus happening in our midst. In end time prophecy, Europe holds a key place. Europe is the place of Rome. And Rome appears again in the book of Revelation, the city of seven hills. That's Rome. And in Daniel and Revelation, a resurrected Roman Empire world state. In the book of Revelation, a stunning image appears in Revelation 17. So he carried me away in the spirit, in the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup filled with abomination and filthiness, the filth of her fornication. And on her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. When I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. And then of what it means, it is written in verse 9, here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. 7 hills, Rome, city of 7 hills. The woman sits upon it, filled with immorality and persecution. A woman, the image of a woman riding a beast. Now, those who've studied biblical prophecy in years past have long said that Europe has to come together to unite in a confederacy. 7 heads, 10 heads. It's the nation united in one. The beginning of the European Union happened in the year 1948. The same year that Israel comes back, Rome starts reviving. And more recently, the new European Union came up with a symbol to represent it. What was the symbol? A woman riding a beast. The beast is a bull, but nevertheless, it is the image of a woman riding a beast. Why? Why would they come up with a strange image like that as their symbol? Where's it from? It's from an ancient myth, a pagan myth, about a woman who is seduced by a god who desires her. So the god takes the form of a beast and carries her away, and it's often called her seduction. What god is it that takes her away in the form of the beast that seduces her? The god is Zeus. The symbol of the European Union is an image of the god Zeus. The bull is actually Zeus, a depiction of the pagan god, a picture of seduction. That's the image of the European Union. What does that have to do with the European Union? Why? The woman's name in the myth, her name is Europa. And it's not a coincidence the name Europe comes from we call it Europe, Europa. It actually comes from that woman. The name Europe comes from a pagan myth that involves Zeus. The very identity of Europe comes from this pagan myth about the seduction from Zeus. The very identity of Europe comes from that image. So it's interesting, as Europe is throwing off its Christian bearings, it reverts to the pagan. Amazing because of what we see in Revelation. And that Europe is the most likely candidate. What would this reveal? What that picture would reveal a civilization that's seduced, taken away from something else. Europe is a civilization that once knew God. A civilization, it's a picture of it being abducted, being seduced by a god, a spirit, seduced to follow another god, the god of that Europe had once known, the God of the Bible, to a false god, a false deity. And there's the link between the end times, the book of Revelation, and the abomination. And what happened in Israel in the time of Hanukkah, that happened to involve the god Zeus, same God, which was at war with God and sought to turn Israel away from God to seduce Israel. Zeus is the apostasy god, the god that seeks to turn God's people away from what they've known. So now Western civilization, which had also come to know God, in a sense, a civilization actually named after being seduced by Zeus. And now the image of Zeus, the image of the abomination, which was the image of the abomination, desolation, in Revelation, it's linked to the Antichrist and linked to Rome. And Europe is becoming an increasingly post-Christian, unchristian, and anti-Christian civilization. And we're watching it in America as well. The spirit of Zeus also comes against the nation of Israel, notice, against the Jewish people, to take away its land, take away its capital, take away its Jerusalem, and defile it. In Europe, it's in Europe right now, even right now, votes are being taken to recognize Palestine, the name that came into existence under the image of Zeus. Zeus has been the anti-God of the Bible, as the Antichrist will be the anti-Messiah of the true Messiah. But in the Bible, there's another anti-God. There's another substitute God who came before Zeus. He was the key god of apostasy before Zeus. He was the seducer God, the alternate God, the God of turning away from the God of Abraham. Who was this God? He was the God we know as Baal, or Hebrew Baal. He was the God that tempted Israel, or was used to turn away from God to the sensual immorality, just like Zeus, and then to coerce and persecute the people of God, as in the days of Elijah, who would not bow their knees to Baal, just as Zeus would do at a later time. Baal would do. A real parallel here. Baal, as in the days of Elijah, Zeus in the days of the Maccabees, and it goes further. Zeus took the form of a bull to carry away Europa, and the bull was one of his key images, the chief images of Zeus. Baal would take the form of a bull, and the bull was one of his chief images. Zeus was the sky god, Baal was the sky god. Zeus was the god of thunder, Baal was the god of thunder. Zeus was depicted as holding a lightning bolt, ready to throw it. Baal was depicted as holding a lightning bolt, ready to throw it. In fact, the worshippers of Zeus most likely took it from Baal. It goes even further. Baal in Babylon was called Bel. And then from Babylon to Greece, it became Belos. The Greeks said they identified Belos, guess what, as Zeus. Baal, Bel, Belos, Zeus. The nations around Israel spoke of Baal Shamim, or Lord, or Baal of the heavens, of the sky. And they identified that Baal Shamim, ancient writers, as guess which god? Zeus. Particularly Zeus Olympia, the same idol of the abomination in the temple. So Baal and Zeus are linked together, are joined, or one. But the mystery goes deeper. Who was Baal? Two words in Hebrew. One is Zavul, which means dwelling or house. And the other is Zavuv, which means a bug or fly. It kind of sounds like that. You see a fly coming around your ear, Zavuv, it's a buzzing. Zzz. Even the English word has the Z in it, Zavuv, buzz. But these words became attached to the word or god Baal. And so it became the Lord of the dwelling, or Baal Zavul, rendered as Beelzebul. And then you have the other one. You have Baal Zavuv, flies. Baal Zavuv, rendered Beelzebub, or Lord of the flies. And what are these names speaking of? Satan, the enemy, the devil. What is behind Baal? The devil. Baal is just a mask. Zeus is just a mask. Who was the one seeking to take Israel away from God? Satan was. Who was the one seeking to coerce and persecute the people of God, stamp out the faith of the Bible, burn the scrolls? Zeus. It was Satan behind Zeus, behind Baal. Zeus, Belos to Bel, Belos to Zeus, and to Satan. Who was behind the seduction of Israel? Satan. Who was the one saying, abandon God? Satan, that's what he does. Who was the one who declared the faith of God illegal? Satan. Let me show you something. I just discovered as I was doing this, just this weekend, the abomination of desolation was set up in the temple by Antiochus, the first fulfillment, in the year 167 BC. Defiling the temple, starting the mass persecution and war, rather the war of Zeus against God. It was the key event. Then came the war, 167 in the next few years, until the Maccabees overcame it. But the very next year, after the idol of Zeus was placed in the temple of Jerusalem, the war of Zeus, the very next year, the year 166 BC, in another Greek city, the Greeks of that city began building an altar to Zeus, a giant altar to Zeus, while the war of Zeus against God was happening in Israel with that idol of Zeus. The idol of Zeus. Now, the idol would be pulled down. The Maccabees would overcome it, would win. That's Hanukkah. But the altar of Zeus would remain in the other city. The city in which that altar of Zeus was called Pergamon. It turns out that that same city appears in the Bible in the book of Revelation. Now listen closely. What the Bible says about Pergamon. Revelation 2:12. And to the angel of the church in Pergamon write, these things says he who has the sharp two-edged sword. I know your works and where you dwell, even where the throne of Satan is. And you hold fast my name and have not denied my faith, even in those days when Antipas was my faithful martyr, who was slain among you where Satan resides. The throne of Satan in Pergamon. What was in Pergamon? The altar of Zeus. And it said that Antipas was murdered, a Christian, on the altar of Zeus. The altar of Zeus, throne of Satan. Just this past week, here's another link, Zeus and Satan. Just this past week, a Florida City Council meeting, which normally opens up with a Judeo-Christian prayer, as a sign of the times we're living in, someone else was allowed to open it up, and these are the exact words. He said, the prayer was, Mother Earth, we gather today in your redeeming and glorious presence to invoke your eternal guidance in the universe, the original creator of all things. May the efforts of this council blend the righteousness of Allah with the all-knowing wisdom of Satan. May Zeus, the great God of justice, grant us strength tonight. This past week. Behind the temptation of Israel in the days of Hanukkah and the fury of persecution, behind the image of Zeus was the devil, the enemy. Who is the one doing these things today? The enemy. Who is behind the seduction of America and Western civilization? The enemy. Turning America away from God? The enemy. Who's behind the turning away of youth from the faith? The enemy. What's behind this barrage of sensuality, carnality, sensory overload? The enemy. Who's behind the sexual immorality? The enemy. Who is the bull seducing Europa and that civilization? The enemy. Behind all these things, promiscuity, fornication, all this sexual immorality, the enemy. Behind all that, the banning of prayer, the removing of the word, the taking down of the Ten Commandments, the banning of God's name, the enemy. Who's behind the death of over 55 million unborn children? The enemy, just as he was in the days of Israel. Who's behind the vilification of believers, the desecration of what is holy, the blaspheming of God on television? The enemy. Who is the one who calls the Bible hateful? The enemy. Who to prosecute the people of God? The enemy. The gods are his masks. The principalities are just his disguises. He wore the mask of Baal. He wore the mask of Zeus. He wears the mask of tolerance, of pleasure, of new morality, of enlightenment, of political correctness, of the promise of freedom. But it's all him. The gods are him, just as he is called the God of this world. It's what he did in the garden. It's what he does now. So understand that. When you are tempted by that sin, that pleasure, that indulgence, know what and know who is behind it. Behind that temptation and that promise of pleasure is not just the enemy, it's your own enemy. The one who, remember, is seeking your destruction. And that temptation and that promise of pleasure is ultimately to seek to destroy you, not to give. He's a thief, to rob you. Every time you give in, you get robbed of something. Behind that temptation of lust is him, the murderer. Behind that temptation to have an affair is the murderer. Know who is behind it. You're a murderer seeking to destroy your life, your marriage, your walk, your well-being. When you are tempted to indulge in that, even if it's a little sin, sin grows. It's a gossip, immorality, vanity. It's there to kill you. And if you give in, you're robbed. You're only hurting yourself. That's why it says abstain from those lusts that war against your own soul. War against your being. So behind it, know who's behind it and respond accordingly. The Spirit, would you give a knife to a murderer? A man wants to murder you, would you give him a knife? Then don't give in to that temptation. You're giving him a knife. Whether it's the voice of temptation or the voice of fear or the voice of depression or gloom or bondage, that's him. It's just his voice. And know it and respond accordingly. Even to live a life of selfishness is to serve a God, because he's the God of self. It's an idol. That thing of you, it's an idol. And who was Baal and Zeus? They were just substitutes for the real thing. They were fallen imitations, perversions of God. Whatever that temptation is to sin, know that it's just a fallen, twisted imitation of the real thing, of the real joy that you would have if you turn down that temptation and turn to God. Turn it down. Just say no, and the real joy will come, and the real blessing will come in your life. In the days of Elijah, in the days of, it looked impossible, hopeless to oppose Baal. Everything was being wiped out. And the people of God were in hiding. In the days of the Maccabees looked the same thing. It looked like that Zeus, the image of Zeus, is going to wipe away God. But where is Baal today? Where is Zeus today? Nowhere. What does it tell you? These are just incarnations, disguises of the enemy. What does it tell you? The enemy is a loser in the end. He will lose. He must lose. He is destined to lose. Sin will lose. Evil will lose. That evil, that bondage is destined to lose. That sin in your life is destined to lose if you go with God. So don't give up. The attack will end. The sin cannot overcome. It's temporary. That's its nature. Sin cannot overcome. The darkness cannot in the end win. But if you will stand with God and walk with God and fight with God, you will overcome and you will win. The Maccabees pulled down the image of Zeus. They reconsecrated the temple, thus Hanukkah. You do the same. That's when the blessings came back to the temple. Pull down that idol, pull down that temptation, pull down that fear, that voice, that thing, smash the idol. Smash, become against that sin in your life. Make war, declare war on it. Because it's against you, it's to destroy you. And it's keeping you from the blessing. It says, submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee. And then reconsecrate your temple, the temple of your body, the temple of your mind, consecrate it to God, the temple of your emotions, consecrate them to God, the temple of your life, to live all out for his will and his glory. That's it. And God will relight. He'll light that light, that fire of your zeal, the joy of the first love of God. He'll fill up your temple, your heart, your emotions, and your mind, and your life will be full with his presence. And as far as the culture goes, what's going on around you, know who's behind it, and do what the Maccabees did in response to it. Resist. As it is written, give the devil no room. Give them nothing. Give them no agreement, no negotiation, no deals, no compromise, no fear, no ground, nothing. Fight the good fight. Do not bow your knee to that thing, to that sin, to that temptation, to that lie, to that falsehood. Do not bow to that political correctness. Do not bow down to Baal. Do not bow down to Zeus. Do not bow down to the devil. Bow down to the God of truth, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of your salvation, the God who gave his life for you because he loved you, Messiah. Worship him only, serve him only, live as his vessel. To hell with Baal, to hell with Zeus, to hell with the devil, but to heaven with God, to life with Messiah, and to victory with Yeshua. Happy Hanukkah.